This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking the medium nib on this Platinum Preppy and grinding it into a stub nib. This is something I've wanted to try for a while. I enjoy stub nibs, and two of my favorite stub nibs are the cursive medium nib that's on the Pilot Metropolitan. Sometimes you'll see it advertised as a stub nib. It's kind of an italic type nib, but the corners of the nib are slightly rounded. There's no tipping, it's just flat. And another of my favorite stub nibs are the nib that came off of my Nemesign Singularity, the Nemesign 0.6 stub nib. Now this nib again does not have any tipping, but it doesn't even have corners. It's just completely round at the end, and this is probably my favorite stub nib. It gives my handwriting some character, but it's not overly crisp. I really like that. So my plan for this nib, since it has a good amount of tipping, is to just plane off the bottom and the top. And I'm going to do that using this sharpening stone that I got from my dad. I'm not sure if it's a wet stone or not, but I am going to use some distilled water on top of it as a lubricant to kind of wash away the material as it's ground off. I've got my loop here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this tipping looks like. It's not perfectly round. Well, but it was in focus there for a second. It's not perfectly round, but there is a nice amount of tipping to work with, and it's maybe I should move this black background. The front edge of it there's some slight flatness to it. It's not completely round like that Nemesign, but it's such a small tip compared to that Nemesign that you're working with that I don't want to have it squared off like the Pilot, because I don't want it to dig into the paper. All right, I'm going to be using some Robert Oster Australian Blue as my ink to test it with as I go. The reason I chose this ink is it's kind of a light colored ink. It's pretty, but it's not one that I'm going to be using most likely for everyday writing, but it was a decent performing ink. It's not an ink that makes every nib feel nice. The pointier the nib, the finer the nib, the more you can feel it. And I wanted an ink that I would be able to feel any imperfections in the nib, and I would be able to get those smoothed out as I was testing it. So I didn't want it to be an ink that just, worked magic and made every nib feel perfect. So, and I also, since I'm going to be working on this stone and probably grinding my nibs like this, I got a little notebook to kind of prop my hand up on, just to give me a nicer angle to work with. I've got my little Rhodia pad to test as I go. And before we get started, I want to see what this looks like, how this nib writes. I've got a Preppy with a 0.3 nib or a 0.3 nib, and it's a nice writer. I've never tried a platinum stainless steel medium. And I'm going to be taking my glasses probably on and off during this. This is very smooth. Okay, that's a nice nib. A little wider than I typically use. And I shouldn't say that. I I like the width of it, but I don't like how round it is. I think if I can get this, if I can grind this down to a nice stub, I think I'm really going to like it. Okay, let's see if I can do this without dumping anything. I am going to use my water here. I guess I can zoom out for now. I'm going to use my water to wet the area of my stone that I'm going to be using. And I'm not sure, this is the finer side. I may have to switch over and use the more coarse side if this doesn't make any progress. I'm going to rinse some of this ink off, wipe it off. I'm also going to take out the included ink cartridge so that it's not rattling around. And I'm going to start with the top of the nib. I figure that will be more forgiving. If I make any kind of mistake, it'll less affect the way the nib writes. Now, I want to hold it flat. I don't want to scuff up the top of the nib, just the tipping. Okay, let's check this out. I think that's made some progress. It looks flatter than it was on the top. I'm going to work on the bottom of the nib a little bit this time. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm down here at eye level, watching and making sure the nib is held, you know, fairly flat. Now, working on the bottom is a little bit more difficult because I've got the feed. I really want to get some water up to the edge so that I don't risk scratching the feed up, scuffing it up. Okay, still need some more work on the bottom edge. It appears to be flattening out, but it is a slow process. I'm going to try taking a little more off the top now. It's flattening it out a little, but there's still quite a bit of tipping there. I'm gonna try the coarse side, just a few passes over it and see what that does. And I'm going to try the top side. I'm curious to see if this is making any progress in the way it writes. Let's see. Well, let's take a quick look at the shape of the nib. Okay, that's kind of interesting. All right. I'm going to rinse that off a little bit. Okay. All right, I'm seeing some stubbiness. The side strokes are noticeably thinner. Let me get a little more ink on here. Now the downstrokes are a little bit rough. Let me see. It needs a little smoothing, but I like the way it's writing now. Let's see. I should have, did my down and side strokes up there before but you can see how wide the down strokes were here. Let's see. Yeah, that's roughly the same, but the side strokes are noticeably, let's see. And I like the way that looks. I don't know, on the A, it doesn't look a whole lot different. On the P, you can see the side stroke is maybe a little bit more narrow. I think it still needs, I need to take a little bit more off. I'm going to flip it over and use the smoother side and do a little smoothing and then test it again. Okay, let's give it another test. Need more ink. I think I might have some little burrs of metal stuck in there. Let me see. Well, hold on. Maybe I can do a little smoothing over here. Dipping it in the ink. Feels like I've made it finer, but not necessarily stubbier. I don't know. Well, it is. It's a little bit rough on that side stroke. Well, I might be watering down my ink. Maybe I should have used a more saturated ink to test it. Let me try a little smoothing on micro mesh. Get some more ink coming in. Okay, let's see what this feels like. Well, that feels pretty good. Now the micro mesh did wonders. That may have done it. There's not it's such a fine nib to begin with, but hey, I think that did it. Well, so instead of it being just fat in all directions, I'm going to have to do another writing sample with a better ink. Okay, that's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to clean this out and try it with another ink and add that to this and see what we end up with. Okay, I flushed all of the Robert Oster ink out that I had been testing it with. So I'm going to test it with a nice saturated ink that it came with. This is a black Preppy, so it came with a black cartridge. And we'll see how long this takes to, oh, there we go. Let me zoom in a little bit. So you're able to write, still get a medium nib, a medium line, but you can write smaller and a little more legibly. It's not as smooth as the original medium that was just round tipping, but it is pretty smooth. Okay, I feel a little more confident now. It wasn't difficult. Trying to do it on camera made it a little more difficult, and having to talk about what you're doing as you go. But you can see on the nib, the top, you can see the light shining off that flat surface. And if I weren't trying to do this on camera, I probably could have been a little more deliberate, a little more patient, and gotten that even flatter. But that is pretty flat compared to what it was. All right, this has been my first attempt at grinding a nib. I didn't ruin it. It's still usable. It writes nicely. I'm pretty happy. I'm encouraged. I'll experiment some more. Now this is just a regular Preppy. I think it was about $3. I'm not brave enough to experiment with like a Goulet nib or an Anderson nib that are like $15. I do have some Jinhao replacement number 6 nibs that I was able to get on eBay that I don't think I'll mind experimenting with those. And my nib that came on my Moonman M800, I would be okay experimenting with it. My favorite nib on my M800 is the Nima sign, so if anything goes wrong, it won't be a complete disaster. But if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.